The screaming stopped at exactly 0847 hours, and Sergeant Michael "Wrench" Donovan knew another crew had burned alive. He didn't look up from the engine he was rebuilding. Couldn't afford to. Not when 3 more Shermans sat waiting in line behind this one, their crews smoking cigarettes with trembling hands, pretending they weren't counting the hours until they'd climb back into their steel coffins. The North African sun had barely crested the horizon, but the maintenance depot outside Kasserine Pass already shimmered with heat that had nothing to do with the weather. The smell hit him first. Always did. Cordite. Burning rubber. That sweet, nauseating stench of cooked metal and something else he refused to name. Wrench's hands never stopped moving, even as his stomach churned. Wrench had learned to keep working, keep his mind on the bolts and gaskets and timing chains, because the moment you stopped was the moment you started thinking about the men who wouldn't be coming back. "That's the 3rd one this week," muttered Tommy Riggs, the kid from Brooklyn who'd been assigned to Wrench's crew 2 months ago. Tommy was 19, built like a scarecrow, and had hands that could thread a needle in a hurricane. Right now, those hands were shaking so badly he'd dropped his wrench twice. "Focus, Riggs." Wrench's voice came out harder than he intended. "This carburetor won't rebuild itself." But Tommy was already looking toward the smoke column rising in the distance, black against the pale morning sky. Another Sherman, probably hit by an 88-meter shell from a Panzer IV, or one of those new Tigers everyone whispered about in hushed, terrified tones. The German guns could punch through a Sherman's armor from 1,000 yards out. Meanwhile, the American 75mm guns on the Shermans bounced off German tanks like pebbles off a battleship. It wasn't a fair fight. It had never been a fair fight. Wrench had been in North Africa for 4 months now, and he'd lost count of how many Shermans he'd patched up, only to watch them roll back out and return as burning wrecks, if they returned at all. The mathematics of it were brutal and simple. 1 German tank could take out 4, sometimes 5 Shermans before going down. The crews knew it, command knew it, and still, the orders came: advance, engage, hold the line. "Sergeant Donovan." Wrench turned to see Captain Harold Morrison striding through the depot, his uniform somehow still crisp despite the dust that coated everything else. Morrison was regular Army, a West Point graduate who'd probably never held a wrench in his life before the war. But he wasn't stupid, and he wasn't cruel. That made him better than most. "Captain." Wrench straightened, wiping grease-blackened hands on a rag that was already beyond salvation. Morrison's face was grim. "We need to talk. Privately." They walked away from the maintenance line, past rows of damaged tanks waiting for parts that might never come, past exhausted mechanics who'd been working 18-hour shifts for weeks. Morrison didn't speak until they were behind a supply tent, out of earshot. "How many Shermans can you get combat ready by tomorrow morning?" Wrench did the calculation in his head. 6, maybe 7 if we cannibalize parts from the wrecks. "But Captain, combat ready doesn't mean they'll survive contact with the enemy. These tanks are undergunned and under-armored. Sending them out is like sending men to their deaths. I know." Morrison's jaw tightened. "I write the letters to their families, Sergeant. Every single one. I know exactly what we're asking these boys to do." For a moment, neither man spoke. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of artillery, a constant bass note that never quite stopped. "There's something else," Morrison continued, his voice dropping lower. "I had a conversation with a major from Ordnance yesterday. Unofficial. Off the record." He glanced around, then pulled a folded paper from his jacket. "They've been testing something. A modification. The brass doesn't want it getting out because it's unconventional." Wrench took the paper, unfolding it carefully. His eyes scanned the technical drawings and his breath caught. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. The modification was insane. Completely, utterly insane. It involved pulling the standard 75mm gun from the Sherman and replacing it with a 76mm high-velocity gun, but not the experimental 76mm that Ordnance had been developing. No, this was something else entirely. This was a British 17-pounder anti-tank gun, the kind mounted on their Firefly Shermans, but modified, adapted, jury-rigged, to fit into the standard Sherman turret through what could only be described as mechanical sorcery. "This shouldn't be possible," Wrench said, his engineer's mind already racing through the implications. "The recoil alone would tear the turret apart. The weight distribution would be completely wrong. The ammunition storage. The Brits have been doing it for months, Morrison interrupted. Their Sherman Fireflies are the only Allied tanks that can reliably kill Tigers and Panthers. The 17-pounder can penetrate German armor at ranges our 75mm can only dream about. But ordnance says it takes too long to manufacture, too many modifications, too much factory time we don't have. Wrench looked up from the drawings. So what are you asking me? Morrison's eyes were hard, desperate. I'm asking if you and your boys can do it here, in the field, without factory tools, without proper parts, without authorization from anyone above my pay grade. I'm asking if you can perform a miracle, Sergeant, because that's what it's going to take to keep our men alive. The weight of it settled on Wrench's shoulders like a physical thing. What Morrison was suggesting wasn't just unconventional, it was borderline mutinous. Modifying military equipment without authorization, using parts and methods that hadn't been tested or approved, risking lives on a mechanical gamble. And yet, Wrench thought about the screaming that had stopped at 0847. Thought about the letters Morrison wrote to families who would never see their sons, husbands, fathers again. Thought about Tommy Riggs and his shaking hands. About all the scared kids who climbed into Shermans knowing they were driving death traps. I'll need everything, Wrench said slowly. Every 17-pounder gun we can get our hands on. Every damaged Firefly in theater. Every machine shop within 50 miles. I'll need welding equipment, precision tools, and mechanics who won't ask questions. You'll have it. And Captain, if this works, if we can actually pull this off. Wrench looked Morrison straight in the eye. You know what's going to happen. Command will be furious. They might court-martial both of us for unauthorized modifications. Morrison smiled, but there was no humor in it. Sergeant, if this works and we start winning engagements instead of bleeding out in the desert, Command can court-martial me all they want. I'll die happy knowing I saved some of my men. Wrench nodded slowly, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. His mind was already working, already visualizing the modifications, the cuts that would need to be made, the reinforcements required, the hundreds of small adjustments that would mean the difference between a tank that could fight and a metal coffin that would explode at the first shot. One more thing, Morrison added. This stays quiet. If word gets out before we have proof of concept, someone higher up the chain will shut us down before we even start. We do this fast, we do it quiet, and we pray it works. Understood, sir. Morrison started to walk away, then paused. Donovan, why'd they call you Wrench? For the first time in days, Wrench almost smiled. Because a wrench is a tool, Captain. It doesn't think, doesn't question, doesn't stop working until the job is done. That's what the Army needs. That's what these boys deserve. As Morrison disappeared into the depot, Wrench stood alone in the shadow of the supply tent, the weight of impossible expectations pressing down on him. Around him, the war ground on, indifferent to the small acts of defiance being planned in its margins. He pulled out the drawings again, studying them in the harsh African sunlight. The modification was ridiculous. It violated every principle of proper tank design. It would require precision work under battlefield conditions, parts that didn't officially exist, and skills that most mechanics hadn't been trained for. It was also the only chance they had. Wrench folded the paper carefully and walked back toward his crew. Tommy Riggs was exactly where he'd left him, still staring at that distant smoke column. Riggs! Wrench called out, and the kid jumped. Gather the crew, all of them. We're about to do something monumentally stupid. Tommy blinked. Sergeant? You wanted to make a difference, kid? You wanted to do something that matters? Wrench gestured toward the line of waiting Shermans. We're going to turn death traps into dragon slayers. We're going to give our boys a fighting chance. For the first time since that morning's screaming had stopped, something like hope flickered in Tommy's eyes. How, Sergeant? Wrench looked at the Sherman in front of him, at its inadequate gun and thin armor, at all the fatal compromises that had been made in the name of mass production and shipping weight. Then he thought about the 17-pounder, about British ingenuity and American determination, about what desperate men could accomplish when they stopped following the rules and started fighting to win. We're going to steal some British guns, he said quietly, and we're going to make them fit where they don't belong. We're going to work through the night. Every night, until we get it right. And then, we're going to prove that the impossible is just another word for Tuesday. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a furnace. In the distance, another explosion echoed across the wasteland. More men dying in tanks that couldn't protect them, fighting a war with equipment that gave them no chance. But in a small maintenance depot outside Kasserine Pass, a sergeant and his crew began to sketch out plans for a ridiculous, unauthorized, completely insane modification that would change everything. The screaming had stopped at Aero 847 hours. By Oro 900, the revolution had begun. The British quartermaster's face turned the color of ripe plums when Wrench showed him the requisition form. "Absolutely not," Major Pemberton said, his clipped accent sharp enough to cut steel. "Those 17-pounders are property of His Majesty's Armed Forces. I cannot simply hand over advanced ordnance to American mechanics who want to play mad scientist with our equipment." They stood in a supply depot 15 miles from the front lines, surrounded by crates of ammunition, spare parts, and 3 damaged Sherman Fireflies that would never fight again. Wrench had driven through the night to get here, accompanied by Tommy Riggs and 2 other mechanics from his crew, Carlos Mendez, a former auto mechanic from Los Angeles who could weld in his sleep, and Jack Hammer Harrison, a big Georgian farm boy who could lift an engine block without breaking a sweat. Morrison's forged requisition form wasn't going to work. Wrench had known it was a long shot, but he'd had to try the official route first. "Major," Wrench said carefully, keeping his voice level, "those Fireflies out there are scrap. The hulls are beyond repair, the turrets are compromised, but the guns are intact. They're just sitting here, rusting in the sun. They are awaiting transport back to depot for proper salvage and reallocation." Pemberton crossed his arms. "Following proper procedure, something you Americans seem allergic to." Tommy shifted uncomfortably beside Wrench, but Mendez caught his eye and shook his head slightly. "Wait, let the sergeant work." Wrench took a different approach. "How many tanks have you lost this month, Major?" Pemberton's expression flickered. "That's classified information. I'm not asking for numbers. I'm asking as one soldier to another." Wrench stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I watched 3 Shermans burn yesterday. Good men. One of them was 20 years old, had a baby girl he'd never met. His last words were screaming for his mother." He paused, letting that sink in. "The Germans killed them from 1,500 yards out. Our guns can't even reach that far effectively." The Major's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "We're not playing mad scientist," Wrench continued. "We're trying to stop the bleeding. Those 17-pounders can punch through Tiger armor. Our 75s bounce off like toys. Give us the guns from your scrap Fireflies, and we can save lives. British lives, too, when our tanks can actually support your advances, instead of dying in the first exchange." Pemberton stared at him for a long moment. In the distance, they could hear the rumble of trucks, the constant noise of a war that never slept. "If I give you these guns," Pemberton said slowly, "and you bollocks up the installation, those weapons are lost forever. If your modification fails and men die because of faulty equipment, that blood is on your hands, Sergeant." "It already is, sir. Every morning I wake up covered in it." The silence stretched between them like a razor wire. Finally, Pemberton sighed heavily. "I was at Dunkirk," he said quietly. "Lost half my company on that beach. The survivors made it out because French soldiers stayed behind with inadequate weapons, buying us time with their lives." He looked at the wrecked Fireflies. "If there's a chance, even a small one, that these guns can save men who would otherwise die." He turned to a corporal standing nearby. "Document those 3 Fireflies as total losses. All components destroyed beyond salvage. Understood?" The corporal, a sharp-eyed Welshman, caught on immediately. "Yes, sir. Nothing salvageable at all, sir. Tragic waste." Pemberton looked back at Wrench. "You never requisitioned these guns, Sergeant. I never authorized their transfer. As far as the paperwork is concerned, they were destroyed in an air raid last week. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, Major." "And Donovan?" Pemberton's expression hardened. "Make it work. Don't let me regret this." 3 hours later, they had the guns loaded onto 2 trucks, along with ammunition, spare parts, and the Firefly's technical manuals that Pemberton's corporal had accidentally included in the shipment. The drive back to their depot was tense, every checkpoint a potential disaster. But Morrison had arranged the right papers, spoken to the right people, and they made it through without incident. By sunset, the guns were hidden under tarps in the back of the maintenance depot, and Wrench had assembled his full crew: Tommy, Mendez, Hammer, and 3 more mechanics he trusted absolutely. They stood in a circle around a gutted Sherman, its original 75-meter gun already removed, its turret yawning open like a patient on an operating table. "Gentlemen," Wrench said, spreading the technical drawings on a workbench illuminated by harsh electric lights, "we are about to commit what the Army would call unauthorized modification of military equipment, what the British would call bloody foolishness, and what the Germans will call a very unpleasant surprise." Hammer scratched his head, studying the drawings. "Sarge, I can see what we're trying to do, but the 17-pounder is bigger than the 75. How do we fit it in the same turret?" "We don't," Mendez said, his engineer's eye already seeing the solution. "We modify the turret, cut out sections here and here, reinforce the mounting with steel plating, redistribute the weight by moving ammunition storage, and add a counterweight system to balance the gun." "That's insane," Tommy breathed. "That's Tuesday," Wrench corrected. "Mendez, you're on welding and structural modification. Hammer, you and Davis handle the heavy lifting, literally. We need to move the gun into position and hold it steady while we work. Tommy, you're with me on the precision fitting. Every measurement needs to be perfect. 1 millimeter off and the recoil could tear the whole turret apart." "What about testing?" asked Private James Davis, a quiet kid from Nebraska who never spoke unless he had something important to say. "We test it once," Wrench said grimly, "with live ammunition in combat conditions, because we don't have time for anything else." They worked through the night, the depot alive with the sounds of cutting torches, welding arcs, and hammers on metal. Wrench had dismissed the other crews, telling them to get sleep, to be ready for regular maintenance in the morning. Only his core team remained, sworn to secrecy, committed to the impossible. The first challenge was simply getting the 17-pounder into the turret. The British gun was longer, heavier, and had different mounting points than the American 75mm. Hammer and Davis used a makeshift crane system to lower the gun into position while Mendez cut away sections of the turret interior, his welding torch throwing sparks that looked like captured stars in the darkness. Tommy worked beside Wrench, measuring tolerances, checking clearances, ensuring that every bolt and bracket would hold under the tremendous stress of firing. The 17-pounder's recoil was brutal. It would put enormous strain on every component. "We need to add reinforcement here," Wrench said, pointing to the turret ring. "The rotational stress alone could crack it." "We don't have the right steel," Tommy said, then stopped. "Wait. The wrecked Sherman's outside. We can cannibalize armor plate from their hulls." "Now you're thinking like a mechanic," Wrench said approvingly. They worked with an intensity born of desperation, each man knowing that lives depended on getting this right. Mendez welded reinforcement plates while Hammer cut armor from dead tanks, turning wreckage into salvation. Tommy fabricated custom mounting brackets from scratch, working with precision that would have impressed a Swiss watchmaker. Around 0300 hours, Captain Morrison appeared, coffee in hand and dark circles under his eyes. "Progress?" he asked quietly. Wrench straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We've got the gun mounted and reinforced. Now we need to figure out ammunition storage, electrical systems for the turret traverse, and about 50 other problems that keep multiplying." Morrison handed him the coffee. "The British manual shows their solution. The British had factories and trained engineers. We have welding torches and desperation." Wrench drank deeply, the coffee bitter and perfect. "But we'll make it work." "How long?" 72 hours, maybe less. We're past the point of backing out now. We've already cut up the turret. This tank either gets the new gun, or it never fights again." Morrison nodded slowly. "There's something else you should know. Intelligence reports a German panzer column moving toward our sector. Tigers and Panthers, supported by infantry. They'll hit us in 4 days, maybe 5. The weight of it settled over the group. 4 days. They needed to finish the modification, test it, train a crew to use it, and pray it actually worked. all before a superior German force arrived to kill them all. Then we'd better stop talking, Wrench said, setting down the coffee cup, and get back to work. Dawn came with no celebration, just exhausted men still working. By noon, they had the basic installation complete. The 17-pounder sat in the Sherman's turret like a predator that had grown too large for its cage, but it fit. Barely. Mendez stepped back, examining his welding work with a critical eye. The structural integrity looks good, but we won't know if it'll hold until we fire it. The ammunition storage is a problem, Tommy said, pointing to the modified interior. The 17-pounder rounds are bigger than the 75mm. We can only carry 36 rounds instead of the usual 90. 36 rounds to kill German tanks, Wrench said, is better than 90 rounds that bounce off their armor. We'll make it work. By late afternoon, they had completed what Wrench privately called the Frankenstein Sherman. It looked wrong. The gun barrel protruded farther than it should, the turret had visible weld seams and reinforcement plates, and the whole assembly had an improvised, desperate quality that would have made any proper engineer weep. But it was done. Morrison returned as the sun began to set, this time accompanied by Lieutenant Danny Chen, a tank commander who'd lost 3 Shermans in the past month and was running out of crews willing to serve under him. Not because Chen was incompetent, because he was unlucky. In tank warfare, luck mattered as much as skill. "Lieutenant," Morrison said, "meet your new ride." Chen walked around the modified Sherman, his expression unreadable. He climbed up, examined the turret, ran his hand along the 17-pounder's barrel. "This is a British gun," he said finally. "It is," Wrench confirmed. "Mounted in an American tank." "Yes." "Without authorization." "Correct." Chen looked at Morrison, then back at Wrench. A slow smile spread across his face. "When do we test it?" "Tomorrow morning," Morrison said. "There's a gunnery range 5 miles from here. We'll take it out before dawn, put some rounds through it, see if Sergeant Donovan's crazy idea actually works, or if we've just created an expensive piece of scrap." "And if it works?" Chen asked. "Then we make more," Morrison said simply. "As many as we can before the Germans arrive, and we give them a surprise they won't forget." That night, Wrench lay on his cot in the mechanics' quarters, staring at the canvas ceiling of the tent. His hands ached, his eyes burned from welding flash and exhaustion, and his mind wouldn't stop racing through every possible failure point, every way the modification could kill the crew instead of saving them. Tommy's voice came from the darkness. "Sarge, you awake?" "Yeah, kid. What if it doesn't work?" Wrench thought about lying, about offering false confidence and empty reassurance. But Tommy deserved better. "Then we figure out what went wrong, fix it, and try again," Wrench said quietly. "We keep trying until it works, or until we're out of time, because giving up means watching more crews burn alive, and I'm done watching that." Silence filled the tent. "My brother was a tanker," Tommy said finally, his voice small. "He died at Kasserine. His Sherman got hit by an 88. They never even got a shot off. I'm sorry, kid. That's why I volunteered for your crew." "When I heard what you were trying to do," Tommy's voice cracked slightly. "I want those German bastards to know what it feels like. I want them to be scared for a change." "Tomorrow," Wrench promised into the darkness. "Tomorrow we find out if we can make that happen." Outside, the desert night was cool and clear. Stars scattered across the sky like shrapnel frozen in time. Somewhere out there, German panzer commanders were planning their next advance, confident in their superior armor and guns, certain of victory. They had no idea what was coming. The revolution, born in desperation and welded together with borrowed parts and impossible hope, was about to roar to life. The gunnery range was nothing more than a flat stretch of desert with rusted hulks of destroyed vehicles positioned at various distances, the corpses of tanks and trucks that had failed their crews, now serving as target practice for those still fighting. Wrench stood 50 yards from the modified Sherman as the first light of dawn painted the eastern sky in shades of copper and blood. Lieutenant Chen and his crew, gunner, loader, driver, and assistant driver, were performing their pre-combat checks, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who'd survived when others hadn't. "You look like you're about to witness an execution," Morrison said, walking up beside him. "Might be," Wrench replied, not taking his eyes off the tank. Either the gun holds together and we have a chance, or the recoil tears the turret apart, and we've just killed 5 men for nothing. They volunteered. Chen knew the risks. Doesn't make it easier. Morrison pulled out a pair of binoculars. First target is at 800 yards, burned out Panzer III. If the gun can hit that, we'll know the sighting and stabilization systems are working. Wrench's stomach churned. 800 yards was well beyond the effective range of the standard 75mm Sherman gun. The 17-pounder should handle it easily, in theory. But theory and reality were separated by welding seams, improvised brackets, and desperation. Chen's voice crackled over the radio Morrison carried. "Control, this is Test Bird 1. Ready for first firing sequence." Morrison lifted the radio. "Test Bird 1, you are cleared hot. Fire when ready." The modified Sherman's turret rotated smoothly, the electric traverse motors handling the extra weight of the 17-pounder better than Wrench had hoped. The long barrel extended toward the distant target, predatory and purposeful. A moment of silence. Then the world exploded. The 17-pounder's report was different from the 75mm, deeper, angrier, a sound that felt like it could crack the earth itself. The muzzle blast kicked up a wall of dust, and even from 50 yards away, Wrench felt the pressure wave hit his chest. Through Morrison's binoculars, they watched the armor-piercing round streak toward the target. The Panzer III Hulk rang like a struck bell, the round punching completely through the front armor and exiting out the back in a spray of metal fragments. "Jesus Christ," Morrison whispered. It went straight through. Inside the Sherman, Chen's voice came over the radio, tight with adrenaline. "Target destroyed. Turret integrity holding. Some vibration, but nothing catastrophic. Ready for second shot." Wrench felt something unclench in his chest. The first shot hadn't killed them. The welds had held. The reinforcements were working. "Control copies," Morrison said into the radio. "Engage target 2 at 1,200 yards." The turret traversed again. This target was a burned-out Tiger tank that had been abandoned during the retreat from El Alamein, a monster of German engineering that had terrorized Allied forces until its transmission failed and its crew fled. Even dead, it was intimidating. The 17-pounder barked again, the recoil rocking the entire Sherman backward on its suspension. Through the binoculars, Wrench watched the round impact the Tiger's frontal armor, the thick, sloped plate that could laugh off American 75mm shells. The round penetrated cleanly, leaving a glowing hole in the supposedly impenetrable armor. "God Almighty," Morrison breathed. "It can kill Tigers." They fired 15 more rounds that morning, each one confirming what Wrench had desperately hoped. The modification worked. The gun could hit targets at ranges that gave the Sherman a fighting chance. The turret held together despite the punishing recoil. The improvised ammunition storage functioned properly. When Chen finally climbed out of the tank, his face was split by a grin that looked almost manic. "Sergeant Donovan," he said, jumping down from the hull, "you just turned a coffin into a cathedral of destruction. That gun hits like the wrath of God." "Any problems?" Wrench asked, his mechanic's mind immediately searching for flaws. "The recoil is brutal. Knocked our loader on his ass the first time. We'll need to brace better. And the turret traverse is slower than standard because of the extra weight. But Sergeant," Chen's grin widened, "we can kill Tigers from 1,500 yards out." "Do you understand what that means?" Wrench understood. It meant American tankers could engage German armor before the Germans could effectively return fire. It meant crews might actually survive their first engagement. It meant the mathematics of tank warfare had just shifted. "How fast can you make more?" Chen asked. "If we work around the clock? Maybe 2 more in the next 3 days." "Make it 3, Morrison interjected. "I'll get you more crews, more supplies, whatever you need. We have 4 days before the Germans hit us. I want every modified tank we can field." The next 72 hours blurred into a continuous cycle of cutting, welding, fitting, and testing. Word had spread through the depot, quietly, carefully, and suddenly Wrench had volunteers. Mechanics who'd heard rumors of a Sherman that could fight back, crews who'd lost friends and wanted revenge, officers who looked the other way when unauthorized equipment appeared on the modification line. They cannibalized every damaged Firefly they could find or requisition from understanding British quartermasters. Major Pemberton himself showed up on the second day with 2 more 17-pounder guns and a Welsh sergeant who'd helped install Fireflies in Britain. "Heard you might need technical expertise," Pemberton said dryly, watching Mendez weld reinforcement plates onto a turret. "Sergeant Evans here has done 47 Firefly conversions. Thought you could use his experience." Evans took one look at their improvised setup and whistled low. "You mad bastards are doing field conversions? With hand tools and prayer?" "Pretty much," Wrench confirmed. "Brilliant. Where do I start?" By the third day, they had completed 3 more conversions. Each one went faster as they refined the process, learned from mistakes, developed techniques that worked under battlefield conditions. Tommy had become an expert at fabricating custom brackets. Hammer could strip a 75mm gun from a turret in under an hour. Mendez's welding had reached the point where even the British sergeant couldn't find flaws. On the 4th day, Lieutenant Chen took all 4 modified Shermans out on patrol, accompanied by a platoon of standard Shermans for comparison. They encountered a German reconnaissance element, 2 Panzer IVs, and a Stu G3 assault gun, at a range of 1,400 yards. The battle lasted 90 seconds. Chen's modified Sherman fired first, the 17-pounder round punching through the lead Panzer IV's turret and killing it instantly. The second modified tank, commanded by a Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez who demanded to be included, destroyed the Stu G before it could return fire. The third modified Sherman killed the remaining Panzer IV as it tried to retreat. The standard Shermans never got within effective range. They simply watched as the modified tanks did what had been impossible before, winning a tank engagement without American casualties. When they returned to base, Rodriguez climbed out of her tank and walked straight to Wrench, her face serious. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "my brother died in a Sherman at Kasserine. Burned alive because his gun couldn't penetrate German armor." She paused, emotion flickering across her face. "Today, I killed 3 German tanks before they could kill me. You gave me a chance to fight back, to survive." She extended her hand. "Thank you." Wrench shook her hand, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. That night, Morrison called a meeting of the tank commanders and senior mechanics. They gathered in the maintenance tent, maps spread across a workbench, the atmosphere electric with cautious hope. "Intelligence confirms the German column will reach our sector tomorrow," Morrison began. "At least 15 tanks, mix of Panzer IVs, Panthers, and 2 Tigers. They're expecting to roll through our positions like they did at Kasserine." He looked around the circle of faces. "We have 4 modified Shermans operational, 3 more in various stages of conversion. Against 15 German tanks, the math still isn't in our favor." "But it's better than it was," Chen said. "With standard Shermans, we'd lose 4 or 5 tanks for every German kill. Now we can engage at range, penetrate their armor, fight on something closer to equal terms." "What's the plan, Captain?" Rodriguez asked. Morrison pointed to the map. "The Germans will come through this valley. It's the only approach that can handle their heavy tanks. We'll position the modified Shermans here, here, and here, elevated positions with clear lines of sight. The standard Shermans will be held in reserve, ready to flank if we can break their initial assault." "It's an ambush," Wrench said. "It's a firing squad," Morrison corrected. "We're going to hit them with everything we've got before they know what's happening. The 17-pounders give us range advantage. We use it." Sergeant Evans, the British mechanic, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, 4 tanks against 15 is still long odds. The Germans aren't stupid. Once they realize your Shermans are penetrating their armor, they'll adjust tactics." "That's why we need every modified tank we can field," Morrison said. "Wrench, how many more can you complete by tomorrow night?" Wrench did the calculation in his head. 3 more, maybe 4 if everything goes perfectly and nothing breaks. Make it 4. I don't care if your crews have to work through the night. I need every gun that can kill Tigers." As the meeting broke up, Wrench pulled Morrison aside. "Captain, even if we win tomorrow, even if every modified tank survives and we beat the Germans, Command is going to find out what we did. They'll see the modifications, read the reports, know we went around proper channels." Morrison smiled grimly. "Sergeant, if we win tomorrow, Command can do whatever they want to me. Court-martial me, demote me, Send me home in disgrace. I don't care. Because we'll have proven that American ingenuity and desperation can beat German engineering. He paused. And more importantly, we'll have saved lives. That's worth any punishment they can dream up. Wrench worked through the night alongside his crew, every muscle aching, his hands raw from tools and heat. They installed 17-pounders by the light of electric lamps and welding torches, each conversion a small act of defiance against the mathematics of death that had defined tank warfare since the invasion of North Africa. Dawn came too quickly. The modified Shermans rolled out to their positions as the sun climbed above the horizon, their crews tense and ready, knowing that the next few hours would prove whether desperation and ingenuity could triumph over superior firepower. Wrench stood on the perimeter of the maintenance depot, watching them go. Tommy stood beside him, both of them exhausted beyond words. "Think we did enough?" Tommy asked quietly. Wrench thought about all the tanks he'd repaired only to watch them burn. About crews who'd climbed into death traps knowing the odds were against them. About his brother's last letter. About all the men who died when their guns couldn't save them. "We did everything we could," he said finally. "Now we find out if everything is enough." In the distance, the sound of engines rumbled across the desert. The Germans were coming. And for the first time since landing in North Africa, the American tankers were ready to meet them as equals. The revolution, welded together from salvaged guns and impossible determination, was about to face its trial by fire. The German column appeared through the morning heat shimmer like steel ghosts materializing from nightmare. Lieutenant Chen watched through his tank commander's periscope, counting silhouettes as they emerged from the valley entrance. Panzer IVs in the lead, their long 75mm guns sweeping the terrain. Behind them, the unmistakable profiles of Panthers, sleek, predatory, death on treads. And bringing up the rear, the machines that haunted every Allied tanker's dreams. 2 Tiger Is, their massive 88mm guns capable of killing Shermans from distances that made return fire impossible. 15 tanks. Just as intelligence had predicted. "All long units, this is Dragon Lead." Chen spoke softly into his radio, using the call sign Morrison had chosen. Dragon. It felt appropriate for what they were about to unleash. "Enemy column entering kill zone. Weapons tight until my command." 7 modified Shermans were positioned along the ridgeline overlooking the valley, 4 from the original conversions, 3 more that Wrench's crew had completed in a marathon 40-hour push. Each tank was hidden behind rocky outcroppings or dug into defensive positions, their 17-pounder guns trained on the killing ground below. Behind them, 12 standard Shermans waited in reserve, their crews knowing they were the second wave, the ones who would engage only after the modified tanks had broken the German formation. Or died trying. Chen's gunner, a kid from Detroit named Marcus Webb, adjusted his sight picture. "Lead Panzer IV at 1,800 yards. I can take him." "Not yet," Chen said quietly. "Let them commit. Let them think they own this valley." In Dragon 3, Lieutenant Rodriguez checked her ammunition count for the 5th time. 36 rounds of 17-pounder armor-piercing. It had to be enough. Her loader, a massive Texan named Jackson, caught her eye and nodded once. "Ready." Dragon 5 was commanded by a veteran named Captain Samuel Hayes, who'd survived 3 tank kills and kept volunteering for more. He'd been skeptical of the modification until he'd seen the gunnery range results. Now he sat in his commander's seat, absolutely still, watching the Germans roll deeper into the trap. The Panzer IVs reached the center of the valley, moving with the confidence of predators who'd never met anything that could truly threaten them. The Panthers followed, their commanders standing in open hatches, scanning for threats they didn't expect to find. The Tigers came last, massive and arrogant, their 80mm guns like the fingers of death pointing at an empty sky. Morrison's voice crackled across the command frequency. "Dragon Lead, all units report ready. Fire on your command." Chen took a breath. This was it. The moment that would prove whether desperation and welding torches could beat German steel. Whether mechanics working through the night could change the mathematics of war. "All Dragon units," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Acquire targets. Fire at will." 7 17-pounders spoke simultaneously. The valley erupted into chaos. Chen's first round hit the lead Panzer IV in the turret, the armor-piercing shell punching through the German tank's side armor like paper. The Panzer stopped dead, smoke pouring from its hatches. Webb was already traversing to the second target, his hands moving with mechanical precision. "Target!" Webb called. "Fire!" The 17-pounder roared again. Another Panzer IV died, its ammunition cooking off in a secondary explosion that threw the turret 20 feet into the air. Rodriguez's Dragon III had targeted one of the Panthers. The German tank was trying to reverse, its commander finally realizing they'd driven into an ambush. Too late. The 17-pounder round hit the Panther's front glacis at an angle that should have deflected, but the kinetic energy was too much. The shell penetrated, and the Panther stopped moving, smoke billowing from every opening. Hayes in Dragon V was engaging the Tigers. His first round hit the lead Tiger in the turret ring, a weak point, but one that required precision shooting at this range. The Tiger's turret locked, unable to traverse, and Hayes's second round finished it, penetrating the side armor and igniting the fuel tanks. The German column disintegrated into confusion. They'd expected weak American Shermans with inadequate guns. Instead, they were being slaughtered at ranges where they should have been invulnerable. A Panther commander finally identified Dragon II's position and returned fire. The 75mm shell hit the rocky outcrop protecting the Sherman, showering it with stone fragments, but doing no real damage. Dragon II's gunner calmly adjusted his aim and fired back. The Panther died. "Dragon 6 is hit," a panicked voice came over the radio. "We took an 88 to the hull." Chen risked a glance. Dragon 6 was one of the newly converted tanks, and apparently the welding hadn't been as solid as it should have been. The crew was bailing out, smoke pouring from the engine compartment, but they were alive. The Tiger that had hit them was already traversing toward Dragon 7. "Dragon 7, reverse position now," Chen barked. "All units, concentrate fire on that Tiger." 3 17-pounders fired simultaneously. 2 rounds missed, but Rodriguez's shot hit the Tiger squarely in the front armor. The massive German tank shuddered, but kept moving. Its frontal armor was too thick even for the 17-pounder at this range. "Shoot the tracks!" Hayes called out. "Immobilize it!" Dragon 7's gunner, with nerves of steel, held position long enough to fire at the Tiger's track assembly. The round hit perfectly, shredding the track and leaving the Tiger immobile but still dangerous, its 80mm guns searching for targets. The second Tiger was trying to withdraw, its commander recognizing the battle was lost. Dragon 3 and Dragon 5 hit it simultaneously from opposite angles, catching it in a crossfire that even German engineering couldn't withstand. The Tiger burned. 10 minutes. The entire engagement lasted 10 minutes. When the smoke began to clear, the valley floor was littered with burning German tanks. 15 had entered. 3 Panzer IVs were trying to retreat, dragging their wounded. The rest were destroyed or abandoned, their crews dead or fleeing on foot into the desert. The Americans had lost 1 Sherman, Dragon 6, and not a single crew member had died. The mathematics of tank warfare had just been rewritten. Chen slumped in his commander's seat, hands shaking with adrenaline and disbelief. "All Dragon units, cease fire. Standard Shermans, move up and secure the area." Rodriguez's voice came over the radio, tight with emotion. "Dragon lead, confirm. We just killed 2 Tigers and multiple Panthers without losing a single crew?" "Confirmed, Dragon 3. Chen felt a wild laugh building in his chest. "We just beat the bastards at their own game." Back at the maintenance depot, Wrench heard the initial explosions and waited. The next 20 minutes were the longest of his life. Morrison stood beside him, radio in hand, both men silent as they listened to the battle reports crackling through the static. When Chen's voice finally came through with the casualty report, Morrison closed his eyes and exhaled slowly. 1 tank damaged. No crew casualties, he repeated quietly. 15 German tanks destroyed or disabled. Wrench sat down heavily on an empty oil drum. His hands were still shaking from 40 hours of continuous work, his vision blurry from exhaustion and welding flash, but none of that mattered now. It had worked. Tommy appeared from inside the depot, grease-stained and grinning. Did they won, Wrench said simply. The modification worked. The 17-pounders performed exactly as we hoped. Tommy let out a whoop that probably carried across half the desert. Within hours, word spread through the entire sector. American Shermans had engaged German armor at long range and won decisively. Crews who'd been terrified to leave base suddenly had hope. Mechanics who'd been working on death traps now knew they were building something that could fight back. And then the brass arrived. A full colonel from Ordnance, accompanied by 2 majors and a logistics captain, showed up at the depot 2 days after the battle. They inspected the modified Shermans with expressions ranging from horror to fascination. "This is completely unauthorized," Colonel Patterson said, examining Mendez's welding work on Dragon 3's turret. "You modified military equipment without proper testing, without engineering approval, without following any established protocols." Morrison stood at attention. "Yes, sir. I take full responsibility." "Captain Morrison," Patterson interrupted. "I'm not finished." He walked around the Sherman, running his hand along the 17-pounder's barrel. "You also saved approximately 40 American lives in a single engagement, destroyed 15 German tanks at a cost of 1 damaged Sherman, and demonstrated that field modifications can be as effective as factory conversions." He turned to face Morrison. "The question is, can you teach other units to do this?" Morrison blinked. "Sir?" "Teach them, Captain." "We're sending British technical advisors, we're expediting parts shipments, and we're authorizing field conversion programs across the entire theater." Patterson smiled grimly. "Your unauthorized modification is about to become official doctrine. Congratulations, you've just revolutionized American tank warfare." He turned to Wrench. "Sergeant Donovan, effective immediately, you're promoted to Master Sergeant and assigned to establish training protocols for field conversion teams. The Army needs more mechanics who can think like you." Wrench stammered, "Sir, we just did what needed doing." "Exactly. That's why you're perfect for this." Patterson looked at the assembled mechanics. "Gentlemen, what you did here was irregular, unauthorized, and completely against regulations. It was also brilliant, necessary, and exactly the kind of initiative we need to win this war." Over the next month, the modification program spread across North Africa. British and American mechanics worked side by side, converting Shermans in field depots from Tunisia to Egypt. The modified tanks acquired nicknames: Dragon Wagons, Fire Breathers, Tiger Killers. German commanders, accustomed to easy victories against American armor, suddenly found themselves facing Shermans that could kill their best tanks at ranges they'd thought were safe. Panzer units that had rolled through Allied lines with impunity now approached carefully, warily, knowing that American tanks had teeth. The tide was turning. 6 weeks after that first battle, Wrench stood in the depot watching the last of his original crew prepare to ship out. They'd trained 20 conversion teams, modified over 60 Shermans, and fundamentally changed how American forces fought tank battles. Tommy Riggs, no longer a kid from Brooklyn but a confident mechanic with 3 field conversion certifications, was heading to Sicily to establish a new modification center there. Mendez was going to England to work with British engineers on improving the conversion process. Hammer had been promoted and was staying in North Africa to run the depot. "Feels like the end of something," Tommy said, shaking Wrench's hand. "It's the beginning," Wrench corrected. "Every tank we modify, every crew we save, that's the real work. That's what matters." Morrison approached, captain's bars replaced by major's insignia. Master Sergeant, you have new orders." Wrench took the envelope, opened it, and read. His eyebrows rose. "Washington," he said. "They want me in Washington?" "They want you to brief Army leadership on field modification protocols," Morrison said. "Share what we learned, help establish programs in other theaters. Europe, the Pacific, everywhere American tanks are fighting." Wrench looked at the orders, then at the depot, at the Shermans bearing the scars of improvised modification and the promise of survival. "What about here? The work isn't done." "The work is never done," Morrison said gently. "But you started something, Donovan. You proved that desperate men with the right tools can change the world. Now you need to teach others to do the same." That night, Wrench wrote a letter to his brother. He told him about the modification, about the battle, about mechanics who worked through the night to save lives they'd never meet. He told him that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with guns, but with wrenches and welding torches, and the refusal to accept that good men should die in machines that couldn't protect them. He didn't know if his brother would understand, but he hoped he would. 3 months later, a modified Sherman with a 17-pounder gun would be one of the first tanks to break through German lines at Normandy. The crew would survive the entire war. They would never know the name of the sergeant who'd first jury-rigged a British gun into an American turret, working through the night in a North African depot because he couldn't stand to watch one more crew burn alive. But Wrench would know. And in the end, that was enough. The war would continue for 2 more years. Thousands more tanks would roll off production lines, and thousands more men would die in them. But the modified Shermans, the Dragons, the Tiger Killers, the ridiculous field conversions that shouldn't have worked, they gave crews a fighting chance. They turned coffins into chariots of survival. They proved that determination and desperation could beat superior engineering. And they showed that sometimes, the most important victories aren't won by following the rules. They're won by mechanics who refuse to accept defeat, who work through the night with borrowed parts and impossible hope, who believe that every life is worth saving, even when the math says otherwise, especially when the math says otherwise. Wrench stood in the North African dawn one last time before shipping out, watching the sun rise over a desert that had drunk so much blood. But now, in this moment, there was hope. Fragile and welded together from salvaged parts, but hope nonetheless. The screaming had stopped at 8:47 hours. The revolution had begun at 0900. And now it would spread across the world. One ridiculous modification at a time. The end. Author's note. While this story is fiction, the Sherman Firefly modification was real. British engineers successfully mounted the 17-pounder anti-tank gun in Sherman tanks, creating one of the most effective Allied tank destroyers of W2. The Firefly could penetrate Tiger and Panther armor at ranges where standard Shermans were helpless. While field conversions, as described here, were rare, the ingenuity and desperation of mechanics and soldiers who refused to accept inadequate equipment was very real, and saved countless lives.